Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Manav Mansour, and I am the Associate Director of Alumni Relations and Community Engagement here at the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University, and will moderate today's Q&A later on in the program. I wanted to thank you all for joining us for our discussion and Q&A on student mental health and well-being with Denise Pope and Shashank Joshi, organized by the Stanford Graduate School of Education and in partnership with Challenge Success and the Stanford Medicine Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shashank and Denise. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you, Manav, very much. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. Thank you, Shannon, for working behind the scenes. And hello to Denise. We're delighted to be with you today virtually. And just want to honor you all taking time out of your busy days to spend some time with us. When we were asked to do this talk, I think we had a certain set of principles and experiences in mind that we had planned to share. And obviously, over the past week, we have been thinking a lot about this particular time together. And so we are welcoming you to this. We are also, as a country and as a community here, in the midst of some of the heaviest and hardest social realities for our communities of color, particularly in Minneapolis, Atlanta, Louisville, and around the country, and many other places that don't get picked up on the news because someone's not running videotape. And even though we live in this bubble in Northern California for the most part, I think so many of us have been profoundly affected and have had a range of emotions for ourselves, for our kids, our family members, as well as people we may know in these communities, as well as our own experiences that we may have had related to racial injustice or police brutality or any of the other things that right now are really in the news and all around our world. We've seen an outcry. So I thought there was something really poignant from this last weekend's New York Times. Roxane Gay, who's a social critic, she wrote that eventually doctors, she's talking to me, even though I'm not doing research in coronavirus, but eventually my colleagues will find a cure for coronavirus. So, but there'll be a coronavirus vaccine, but Black people will continue to wait for a cure for racism. And so I think I certainly have felt heartened by the current uprisings around the globe, which represent a deep desire to promote human dignity with fundamental rights for health, for housing, and justice. And, you know, if not for the very right to exist, at least to breathe. And a lot of people on Stanford are doing great work in this area. Jennifer DeVere Brody wrote this piece last week for the rest of the faculty. And I'm a child psychiatrist, and in our division, you know, we're really hoping that the collective actions of the past week and that are going on this very minute as you listen to me might move the few who oppress the many. So thank you, Jennifer DeVere Brody, for those words. And I wanted to start off by just sharing a few things that we've been thinking about as we have been planning for this talk. And I wanted to first start with the things that I do in times of COVID, and especially now this past week, these questions for daily quarantine. I hope some of you may have seen them. I've certainly posted them. We run a site with students called Stoked at Stanford, Stanford Stoked. Our students have been posting this. This comes from an author named Brooke Anderson, and this was written for the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley. And yes, it's true. Stanford people can learn a lot from people who write from Berkeley, absolutely. So I'd like to just review these very quickly because I think they're great reminders and they're important things that I try to do. The first one is, what am I grateful for today? And I shared a little bit about that. The idea that we're in this bubble can bring up some mixed emotions. I still am thankful that I have a shelter. Being asked to shelter in place, I've got a place to shelter. I've got Wi-Fi that I can be broadcasting this with colleagues like Manav who can help us with this. And these lessons are often coming to us from perhaps the most unexpected places. So when Brooke Anderson wrote this article for the Daily Quarantine Questions, she was actually citing Oscar Lopez Rivera, who was a recently freed Puerto Rican political prisoner who was in solitary confinement for 36 years. And every morning he would sing the song Gracias a la Vida, which is, thank you to life. And so this is how he made it through, 18, 19 years of solitary confinement. So he cultivated a daily gratitude practice while imprisoned. I think the least I could do as a free person is to try and take 5 or 10 minutes in the evening to do some exercises on gratitude. And I'll share a specific one in a couple of minutes. Number 2, who am I checking in on or connecting with today? I have elderly parents and aunts and uncles. I have teachers and mentors and people around the country. And it feels really good to call them or FaceTime them. So it's not only, obviously we talk about social distancing, people are talking more about physical distancing while maintaining social connection. What expectations of normal am I letting go of today? I think that one is especially relevant for my residents and fellows and students I work with who are training to become psychiatrists. We're facing this global pandemic, and we in psychiatry and psychology are still doing our work, and we're doing it virtually, and we have to let some things go. I'll also say that we've got the lowest no-show rate we've had in my 20 years of being at Stanford. People are there, they're logging on, they're on the screen. Teenagers are in their room. We're having therapy sessions, and it's quite something. But we can't do everything all the time. Sometimes our calls get interrupted, and sometimes we have Zoom fatigue, and we've got to have some self-compassion as well. Number 4, how am I getting outside today? Thankfully, with some of these restrictions being lifted, hopefully there will be more outside activities. But certainly in the first couple of months of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to be really active as well. For number 5, how am I moving my body today? Again, doing it mostly inside, but hopefully now we'll be able to do more outside. And then finally, number 6, what beauty am I either creating, cultivating, or inviting in today? And for me, it's just, again, being grateful for being able to ride my bike to work. We've got a pandemic globally, but locally, the flowers are in bloom and the birds are singing. And, there's a lot to notice outdoors. And so those are some basic things that I have found helpful as my daily quarantine questions. And you can find those resources in the page that's going to be posted by Manav tomorrow, and as well as some of the other things I'm going to talk about here. So one of them is the California Surgeon General's Playbook. Now, some of this might look familiar for those of you who know Challenge Success's PDF approach to raising healthy adults, raising children and healthy adults. You're going to hear more about that from Denise. But I just wanted to highlight this. We've never really had a Surgeon General like the one we have now. This is actually our first Surgeon General. She's a pediatrician, Nadine Burke-Harris. She trained at Stanford several years ago, and when she was a resident, we all knew she'd be a star. We didn't know she'd be a superstar this soon after graduating, 10, 15 years out. So this playbook is really designed to capitalize on what we know about stress and distress. Many of you know about, growth mindset. Some of that work was developed right at Stanford. But what happens when it's too much? What does that look like in our bodies? What does that look like in terms of how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about our family? Are we able to do the things that we typically do? So here on Stress Busters, you see the 6 main areas. And one thing I really like about this website they put together is you can come up with your own plan, and they help you kind of create the habit and revisit it. So I think some of this is probably going to sound like you've heard it before, but it's kind of cool when it comes from the Surgeon General. There's evidence to show that it can really cultivate mental health and physical health. As I mentioned, the Berkeley Greater Good Science Center, that is where I talked about these 6 questions for our 6 daily questions to ask ourselves during quarantine. So I just wanted to highlight that site and a few other sites that we have found really helpful. The anti-racism resources were put together by some folks in Denise's group, Challenge Success, and it's pretty comprehensive. I know there are a couple of authors that worked on that. I posting an NPR piece that was broadcast on Monday, and it featured interviews with the pastor of George Floyd's church, as well as an African-American psychiatrist who talked about some of the ways we can cope with some of the images and some of the good work we'd like to start doing to make some changes with regard to racial justice in this country. A number of other school resources here I've shared. This one, the Teen Guide to Mental Health, is put together by the San Diego County Office of Ed. Really nice design, just two sides of one page with a lot of resources, and a number of other resources for different areas of focus. So for LGBTQ youth, looking at mental health and suicide prevention in schools, and then a number of COVID-19 webinars that are on the Center for Continuing Medical Education website. These are available for free, and these are really great for parents, particularly of children, and also how you can talk with your children about COVID-19, as well as about race and culture and identity up here in these resources. So now I just want to close out with a couple of slides with a couple of reminders about things you probably already know about, but this comes from my colleague, Grace Shongu, who just published a book on well-being for physicians. It's just reminding us that we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So, we're full of probably, most of you on this call, GSE graduates, alumni, positive input, family support, meaningful, engaging psychosocial activities with perhaps mentoring that you're doing of younger people or being mentored professionally with a lot of intellectual stimulation. And that's there to really buffer some of the negative input and the stress that may create internal conflict and the demands on your time and your energy. So what we're after is this full battery here. And we try to build in some of these activities like the well-being, the 6 stress busting strategies, some of the well-being activities that I highlighted earlier, is to build the capacity so that when we are at compassion fatigue and burnout, we can find a pathway back to this. So, most of us probably spend our time somewhere between here and here. How can we spend more of our time on this half of this particular graphic? So that's energy management. Thinking about our mind and cognitive strategies to enhance our well-being. I mentioned before gratitude, and one of the things we do with our Stanford undergrads is we have them do the 3 blessings or the 3 good things practice. So there's been some research looking at this, and one study was published recently in the British Medical Journal. If you take 10 minutes every evening to write down the 3 good things that happened that day, and then importantly, why they happened. If you do that for 2 weeks, you will find that up to a year after, you'll notice this within a month, but up to a year after, you will have improved happiness, a better sense of life balance, and a reduced risk for burnout and depression. This study was done for healthcare workers, but we know from work of Marty Seligman and others who've done work in positive psychology that if you can do this for even a week, you're likely to have benefits for several weeks. I always encourage my students who are all doing this on their phones or their computers to actually get a gratitude journal or something that they can write in, because we know that the actual act of writing in a journal activates different neurological pathways and allows for memories to be created in a more solidified way than simply writing it down electronically. And that can work too, but if you have a chance to put pen to paper, that can be even more powerful. And then finally, self-valuation. What do I mean by that? Prioritizing personal well-being and a growth mindset in response to errors, and really thinking about life like you would be a soccer or little league coach. And I've been doing that for 11 years. It's the first year I wasn't able to do it. We have 3 boys, and we really lamented a loss of season. However, growth mindset from that. You know, I had a lot of chance to reflect on, go through the yearbooks and think about all the really wonderful memories and the things that I've learned about parenting and about well-being, and also learning from mistakes. So we were always talking to our players about never wasting a good mistake, right? Or the worse the mistake, the more the chance for learning. How are you going to not make that mistake again? And in baseball, it's like, you know, got to get the glove down to the ground so it doesn't go through your legs, right? So really making sure you don't waste a good mistake or a bad mistake. And higher self-valuation is associated with lower risk of burnout, and of course the opposite is true as well. This work comes from our colleague Mickey Trockle, who's in our department. It was published last year, and I think it was just a nice sort of principle to highlight here. And then finally, cognitive reappraisal. This is just the idea, it's a technique we use in therapy, like cognitive behavior therapy. We're often kinder to others than we are to ourselves. So thinking about self-compassion, thinking about, you know, if I'm having these feelings of, I didn't do this well enough, or I should have celebrated my kid's graduation better, or I could have, I would have. It's okay. You know, it's kind of the idea that you're going to observe that feeling and understand it rather than just feeling it only. So if you can get away from just always feeling the feels, right? And getting away from, when you make mistakes, they're mistakes. They happen. They do not define me. And then the other piece of cognitive reappraisal is really being able to name the emotion. When you can name the emotion, yeah, that's that annoying guilt. That's that thing I do that called rumination, where I run a thought in my head over and over. That engages the prefrontal cortex, which is the higher level learning centers, as you probably all know from being GSE alumni. And it will override the emotion center, the amygdala. So the more of these exercises you can do, the more mindful daily practice you can do. You're really activating the neuronal pathways in the prefrontal cortex, which can really help in times of COVID, and really even as we open up, as hopefully COVID goes into our rearview mirror a bit more. So what are your essential ingredients for your recipes? We can share some of that on the chat. And you know, everyone has different ways of cultivating well-being and cultivating resilience. And that's really what we're looking for, not only in our children as we raise our adults, but also in one another. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Denise.
Thank you, Shashank. Shashank, I've presented with you lots of times, and I learn new things every time. And I think, in particular, that was really, really helpful. And I think what my slides will do is really kind of give an overview to that, which is to keep the big picture in mind. Many of us are parents, many of us are educators, and as we are trying hard to not be perfect and recognize that we have to let some things go, we want to focus on what really, really matters right now, which is primarily health, safety, and relationships. That's, if you go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's the foundation, right? You can't really do anything else unless you have those things. And Shashank offered lots of ways to put your own oxygen mask on first, right? You have to take care of yourself as an educator, as a parent, before you can actually do unto others, right? So this idea of asking those 6 questions, making sure you are getting outside, making sure you are working on your own healthy eating, sleep habits, how you're able to reduce stress with all of those ways that Shashank mentioned to recharge your battery. That's really important. I think right now we have lots of things causing fear and anxiety in our kids, and your job as a loving and caring and trusted adult is to calm those fears and anxiety in the best you can in a very developmentally appropriate way, without being too Pollyanna and rosy, but appropriately saying, we are here to take care of you. We are socially distancing because that's how we take care of others. We are listening and becoming allies to people of color who are going through horrible tragedies right now that we are a part of, and we are working to redress the system that has been causing so much pain and anxiety. So there's lots of developmentally appropriate ways to talk about this, lots of resources. As Shashank mentioned, there's a anti-racism resources for kids that we'll send out tomorrow that everyone can keep contributing to. I think whether you're in school, whether you're planning for summer school or planning for the fall, the idea of sort of coming up with a school-wide climate of care, that the most important thing right now is not to pass from, 7th grade to 8th grade, not to learn Algebra 2. The most important thing is that people feel cared for, that they feel like they belong, that they feel like there's an adult they can go to, whether that's at home or out of home. One of the things we worry about a lot right now is trauma and abuse. Long-term, along with anxiety and depression, and we can answer questions around sort of how to notice those things if you're concerned as an educator or as a parent, but to really focus on increasing those relationships. One of the things we hear from kids is that they weren't physically seeing someone on the other side of a screen, and to try and get those kids the Wi-Fi hotspots and the devices they need to be able to see their teachers. We know that that has been a real source of comfort for kids who are lucky enough to be able to check in daily, weekly, in whatever way, text, phone. Some teachers are driving and socially distancing at the front door. So we know that kids need to see you and feel your presence. And that learning happens all the time. You are modeling how to be resilient in the time of a pandemic. You're modeling how to stand up for your rights, how to listen to others, how to really hear the pain and suffering and to take action. So it's okay to be less focused on sort of the content and the skills of school and know that what they're learning right now is as important, if not more, in their lives. And the school part will come. And I don't want to minimize the loss of learning that has occurred, but there's an order to things. And if people don't feel cared for and heard and listened to and safe, that learning isn't going to happen. So we have, go ahead, Shashank, to switch the slide here. We have a mnemonic aid at Challenge Success that really summarizes a little bit about what the physician's playbook was talking about. And yeah, you can just keep clicking. I think there's just three bullets there, Shashank. It stands for PDF, right, which is playtime, downtime, family time. And it's a mnemonic aid to help you kind of, as you keep the big picture in mind, these are all research-based protective factors for kids. Kids need, and I would say adults too, need enough time for play, including social life, time to build those relations, and exercise and movement. And that is a protective factor. Another protective factor is downtime, right? They need time to unwind, self-directed relaxation. What do they do when they're feeling up to here? What do they do when they're feeling stressed? Do they have a go-to coping strategy? If they don't, can you model that as a loving adult in their life? Whether that's exercise or meditation or yoga or taking a hot bath, whatever it is. Sleep is part of downtime, right? Everybody needs to get enough sleep. That's one of the biggest things associated with mental health. And this is a tough time when you're facing anxiety, when you're watching distressing news articles and whatnot. And then there's one more click, Shashank, for family time, which is really a very important protective factor. You want to preserve time for family meals, for family games, for family service opportunities. I know you're thinking, oh my gosh, it's all family 24/7, but we mean really intentional family time where you're saying, we are here together as a family. We are here for you. We love you unconditionally, and we will protect you and be by your side. And we're going to have tough conversations about how to get along in a small space. We're going to have tough conversations about how to get along as a community with people who are different from us. And to work on ways that you can be of service to others. And tomorrow, Manaf will be sending out a sheet. We have a bunch of summer ideas that you can do during the pandemic that promotes family time, that promotes service opportunities, things you can do as a family, things kids can do to feel like they're making a difference when there's so much going around that is out of their control. Taking that time to do something and do unto others, right, is going to help, along with feeling really grateful for the blessings in your life and what you are, lucky to have right now, given where so many people are. So PDF, playtime, downtime, family time, keeping the big picture in mind, a way to sort of wrap up all those great ideas that Shashank had for mental health and well-being.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Denise and Shashank. I think one of the questions that came up earlier from our registrants was just getting a better sense of summer ideas. And Denise, you kind of mentioned the Challenge Success resource page that's coming in there. Can you give us a sneak peek in terms of what some of those resources might be and things that we can start to think about for the summer?
I can. I feel you. Parents, we usually send our kids to camps. We usually send them to some structured activities that many of which are being shut right now due to safety. So we came up with a bunch of ideas. One big category is actually service and what you can do as a family. And think about this summer. Can you organize a food drive? Can you continue to sew masks and get those out? Can you, as a family, adopt a pen pal or some elderly neighbors and check in on them, or help them learn how to use Zoom so that they can check in with their relatives? So there's a lot of things you can do in terms of service. There's a lot of things you can do in terms of learning something new. This is the time to not just watch Netflix all day long, right? And there is a time for some relaxing and using media and actually some social issues about playing games with others and all that. But you can also use the internet for good, which is to learn a new hobby, to dive deep into something you've always wanted to discover, to host a movie club with friends or a book club with friends, right? So lots of ideas around learning new things, lots of ideas around sort of how do you recreate things that you would have done in summer that there's kind of a loss. Camping in your backyard instead of going to the camping trip, right? Taking a virtual trip somewhere as a family. Recreating some camp songs and having a sing-along, right? Lots of ideas of how to sort of preserve some of those summer things. So lots of ideas on there coming at you, but those are some sneak peeks.
Good to hear. Shashank, we got a question earlier from one of our registrants about questions that parents or caregivers should ask to maybe not assess a student or their child's mental health and well-being, but maybe to just provide some indicators where there are specific ways that you can layer a question or word a question just to get a sense of what might be going on in the mind of our students today.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's something we're asking ourselves as parents as well. I think a really important thing to remember is something that you hear all the time from clinicians and from pediatricians, which is parents, you know your kid's the best. So experts can make recommendations, but ultimately they're going to ask you to trust your instinct about how you can have these conversations with your kids. Now, I can be a child psychiatrist on the outside, but at home I'm a dad, right? So if I'm asking these questions, I got to make sure I do it in a careful way, or they'll think I'm trying to, analyze them. So that's been my sort of life chore. We like to invoke PDF in our busy lives at least 4 or 5 times a week for a family meal. As Denise likes to teach, it's not always easy. People still have a lot of things going on, but if you see a change in the level of interest or the level of activity, for a younger child, it's going to look different than for a teenager. We understand that teens are going to be very disappointed to not get to go away on that family trip or do some of the things they wanted to do. But then, really thinking about that, I would say now, because now is graduation week or end of the school year week. And so you've got some chill time to think about, and you don't have to do anything right now, but you could just engage in conversation. Well, I had a patient the other day whose parents were saying they're not interested in doing any of that. They are just so down on themselves about how the school year went and how certain friendships didn't go exactly the way they predicted, seniors who didn't get their prom. And so I think we really, as parents, the number one piece of feedback we get is just listen. Don't try to solve the problem. But first, you got to really understand what it is they're struggling with. And I always find for parents that if you just begin with the idea that you're not going to do anything, you're just going to be, and you're going to just try and let your kids chill. I mean, one of the pieces of the what semblance of normal am I going to give up today? I think we have to ask ourselves that for this summer. We know there's going to be a lot more. We had predicted there's going to be a lot more screen time. I think my kids are so aching to get out now. In some ways, maybe this was doing us a little favor they've had so much time on the screens. They are really looking forward to getting out now that they can. So it might be something as simple as a family bike ride and one of the kids doesn't want to go, and they usually want to go. So I would look for changes in behaviors, changes in the level of interest, not just for a day or two, but if it goes on for several days, um, I think that's the time when you want to really find out what might be going on for them that might be more than the usual transition in the time of year, and mourning the loss of the usual summer that they might have had otherwise. And we might be dealing with something more on the clinical side, like some kind of anxiety or mood condition that might need some assessment. And pediatricians and child psychologists and psychiatrists are absolutely open for business right now. Making a call to the clinic, you will get in fairly quickly. The wait lists are not very long, believe it or not. It'll most likely be a virtual visit. But if you are worried, it's never a bad idea to do a quick call with the pediatrician and check in about things that you might be concerned about.
So on the note of screen time in particular, we've noticed that, when times get tough and we're all getting busy, sometimes the screen is one of the best places where we can kind of just gain some semblance of our own work and to be able to juggle certain things. And one of the questions that we got from Nikki was that our family went from a 1 hour limit of screen time per week to full immersion into screens. Full immersion. How do we reprogram our kids' brains to not need the screens as much?
Well, I have some thoughts on that. We totally understand the full immersion. It was a put your oxygen mask on first. You had to get work done. They needed things to keep them busy. We want to move out of full immersion, right? So one of the things that we ask about media, not all media is created equal. Are they using media to connect? Are they using media to create? Are they using media in ways that are using their brain versus the mindless sitting on the couch watching TV, right? So we want to promote the things that they're actually using their brain, or they're connecting with grandma, or they're connecting with their friends. And at the same time, you don't want to do that all day either. You need to move your body. You need to get outside. You need to make sure that your eyes are getting off of screen at an appropriate time so you can get some sleep, right? The screen is saying, wake up, wake up. It's this sort of melatonin. It has an effect on your melatonin. So you sit down as a family and you talk about rules and you talk about why this is a change, why we understood it happened now, but now, especially as things are moving up, school is over, etc., we're going to have some different rules, and here's why. Let the kids weigh in if it's developmentally appropriate, and let them come up with what happens when they slide back into using too much media. What kind of prompts or things can we do as adults to remind them and help them realize? Is it setting a timer? Is it, doing some kind of app that cuts it off or whatever? So Shashank, you may want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, for my boys, they love their screens. And like I said, I've just noticed in the last week, they just cannot wait to get off their screens. And I think we will slide into summer mode where we've got to be a little more active in terms of the agreements and the rules. One thing I've actually come to appreciate that may seem counterintuitive to this group is I actually think screens can be really good. They can be really helpful if we help our kids to manage the time. Because as we've just raised this one adult and we've got him out the door here in the fall, it's like, yeah, we're not going to be there to help him self-regulate. So this is the time where he gets to practice. And so we're giving them a lot of freedom with how to manage the time, but we are being very strict about saying, this is the time when the Wi-Fi is going to be cut off. And that means we don't want you on the phone either it means that's the time you can be doing something else. You can be reading, be listening to music, chilling. Outside of that, we're going to give you a lot of freedom about how you manage your day. You're going to have this much screen time to manage, and you get to decide how to use them. It's a little bit like a bank account. And we feel now, especially with an older teen, young adult, a middle teen, and a new teen, that's so much more important to us now is seeing how we're moving from being a manager to being a consultant, right? In Michael Riera's words, that's our goal with parenting teenagers, making that transition from parenting tweens. We want to see how they're doing, and then we can step in. but we can only step in if we've seen how they're doing it and checking in with them at least once a week about like what we're observing based on what our agreements were, and what we see them doing, and we may have to revisit them.
I'm going to pull a question right from the chat. This is from Elizabeth. Do you have any tips or strategies for educators of young children who may experience school or separation anxiety in the fall, especially after being at home with family so much, especially if their teachers are wearing masks and will be trying to keep physical distance?
As I mentioned before, we've got a couple of webinars that are on the slides that are going to be posted, where you can actually hear from some of the young child psychologists and other mental health workers who've been having these exact conversations, particularly around for younger kids and daycare. And actually, there's some resources there about how to talk to young children about what is COVID-19 and talking in general about health and protection and how we want to spend time together. But right now, we need to do it in a way that's safe. And there are a number of resources on the resource page that are everything from, really fun, cute, short cartoon pieces about, what is a virus and how to protect yourself and washing your hands, to how to be around your friends and how to be in the classroom and with your teachers learning in a safe way when we have this thing called COVID-19 that is in our environment. And also really giving them a realistic picture about how you can't get it and how there are a lot of things in the beginning of this we didn't understand about the condition, and over time we've understood much more. And so for younger kids, I think they always want to feel like there is some predictability and some safety. So as much as you can educate yourself about a parent and be giving this information with confidence, you don't have to have all the answers. You want them to ask lots of questions, but you want to have a brief, simple approach that helps break down some of what we know in language that little kids can understand, so that they can look forward going to school, even if they have to wear a mask. Everyone's wearing a mask, and that's what we're doing right now. And you can give them a little bit of the reason of why we do that as a community for now.
Yeah, and I would say for separation anxiety, and actually this works for older kids too, because there's kids who are going into new schools or having new teachers, and they may feel not quite separation anxiety, but at least some worry, to make videos and send the videos out ahead of time and let them see you in action without a mask on and let them see your face. I know something they do at the hospitals, they have a picture of what you look like this is a real person of me smiling underneath the mask. But if you send the videos ahead of time, if you do any kind of touching base, even if you wanted to do a sort of home visit where you knock on the door and say hi, socially distance, that's actually practiced before the pandemic that we would have kindergarten teachers do. So the more you can kind of start that relationship early in little doses and let them see you as a real person for all kids, I think that's going to help.
This comes from Ellen. I am most concerned about supporting our teachers, mental health providers, and students this fall. There's still so much uncertainty. It is difficult to plan well. What would be your advice on planning for the school in the fall? I know this is a big question. Maybe just a few of the most important considerations perspective.
Certainly there's going to be a return to school in fall. It may be all virtual, or it may be some hybrid where there's some on-campus time and others that are going to be virtual. And I think that you put in these scenarios and you will have some guidance from the district, but now is the time to really put your voice in to say, look, we know there's some cuts because of COVID. Now is not the time to be cutting mental health supports. Now is not the time to be cutting staff supports. These things not only have to not be cut, they have to be enhanced, because we know, although we were spared in the Bay Area from the majority of COVID casualties, like they were in New York, if you think about that comparison, now is not the time to be reducing the amount of frontline workers and PPE and ICU beds and ventilators, right? So now is not the time to be reducing the number of mental health workers and training we do for teachers and intern-related supports that provide mental health support for students, because we know that mental health is part of overall health, and our students have to be healthy enough to learn, and our teachers have to be healthy enough to teach. And if you can broadcast what I just told you in that 30 seconds to your school boards, you are making a very important, you're speaking truth to power there, and that's something you can do as a parent. So take some agency for that, because they will listen to you, especially if there are a lot of you doing that in your own local school boards there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would add to that, if you're an educator, there are some themes that we're hearing over and over again from kids and from teachers as to what has been working and what hasn't been working during remote learning. As you plan for the fall, how are you making relationships a priority in your school? Is there a way to have small groups stay together in advisories with one consistent adult checking in on kids? Schools that are talking about taking 1 week on and 1 week off, are there ways to keep those connections going during the week off where they're just getting packets, right? So relationships, the use of time, kids are really appreciating the flexibility of not having something due every single day, of having an ability to work on something, dive in, or if there is an emergency, to step back and have that flexibility and have that understanding. So relationships, time, and then the third thing would be less is more. And I know you've heard me say this before, those of you who have seen me do webinars, but there's no way you're going to cover the same content that you were planning to cover this year. We try to cover way too much in general anyway. So to really focus on what's essential, to know that you can't have the same length of day when it's online. There is such a thing as Zoom fatigue. We're all hitting 5 o'clock right now and we're feeling it. But to really focus on what are the key things that we absolutely need to cover content-wise and skill-wise in a realm of a very caring climate that has relationships as a focus and a lot of flexibility built in.